old bollards, or rather old barrier. I was cycling last year through Croydon Park in Wellingborough, and to my absolute horror, I discovered a new barrier had been installed. This wasn't a barrier that partially blocks access. It's like a chicane. It wasn't one of those. It was a full-on barrier. By the way, side note, those chicanes should all be removed, but separate story, separate video. This was a full barrier that had been installed, completely blocking access. I said to a councillor, please would you be able to help me? Would you be able to contact the person within Northants Council to get this removed? And he replied saying, no, this is the new vehicular access point. And that was that. Well, it wasn't that for me. And I decided I needed to get that removed because although I was able to lift my bike up, I slid down the mud a little bit, but lift it over and I was on my way. If someone was not able to do that, they would be trapped in the park at that point and would then have to backtrack on themselves quite a distance to go to another point to try and exit. And they might not be able to exit because of the partial barriers there. Side note, there is a partial barrier underneath, but because of the chicanes, they have these sort of pedestrian chicanes, it's not possible to pass. So I was quite shocked, and what I did was I firstly tried to fix my street.com. I submitted that, and I knew that someone in Northants Council would see it. And in that, I just mentioned the Equality Act 2010. I'd hoped that by seeing that, they'd realise that, oh dear, someone has made an illegal choice to put in that barrier, which can't be done. And instead, they would just sort of refer it to someone else internally, and I didn't hear back. So I submitted a Freedom of Information request. Now, these are very powerful tools which hold decision makers to account and can be really useful for transparency reasons, but sometimes they are misused. And in the case of, say, organisations such as dodgy newspapers, may submit them en masse, they may be complicated, they may cost a lot of money to research. But in this instance, I felt it was very warranted because it needed to highlight that this was a poor and illegal decision. And so I submitted this request, and within a couple of weeks I heard back. And I have to admit, at first my heart sank. So it was a very lengthy request. It was a 38-point Freedom of Information request. Not all of them were questions. It was more statements and then some questions to really highlight about the Equality Act 2010. And one of the questions was, had they considered it? Had they carried out an impact assessment? And the answer is they had no record. So no, they hadn't. And the next questions were about the sort of more into the act, and basically what they were saying in their response was that people could just use other access points, and no, they can't. No. So I was expecting them to sort of say, well, this is sort of, we're going to try and extinguish this, and no, I was shocked because the last response, or one of the last responses, were they have instructed their contractors to remove the barrier and install free retractable bollards. I was very pleased. So I have to say, and I have to make it clear, that this Freedom of Information request, if I'd composed it, wouldn't have been like that at all. It would have been very wordy, very descriptive, or full of explanation rather than questions. And the questions are what's needed to really highlight how they have failed. So I actually was inspired, well, not inspired, I copied the template that Richard Bennett had produced. He was an avid campaigner for equal access, and I really do strongly recommend, if you check out the link below, his blog and his Twitter have some fantastic examples of his campaigning work. He was such a campaigner for a fairer and more accessible society. He sadly passed away a couple of years ago. It's very, very sad. He not only changed it to make his life easier, but for so many others, and encouraged other people to do so. So I saw the template and I had decided to use it as well. So thank you to him, because that's where I had my success, and hopefully you will too. Thank you very much for listening or watching. Speak soon, Samuel.